Hello, everyone. I am Rhonda Velvet. I am the coordinator with CYN, Connecting Young Nebraskans. We are an affiliated fund of the Nebraska Community Foundation and a statewide network. We're designed to empower young Nebraskans to connect, lead, and shape the future of our communities and state. Doing things virtual is very comfortable to us because we meet virtually every single month. So this is very natural for us to get together. So thank you for joining us today. If you yourself on this call is a member of our CYN Fund Advisory Committee, would you just hold up your hand and wave so people can kind of identify who you are? Thank you very much. Before I introduce our facilitator today, I'm going to turn it over to one of our co-chairs of CYN, Jonathan Jank, who has an announcement for us.
Great, thanks, Rhonda. Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining us. Really grateful for the investment of time in this really important conversation. So exciting to see a number of familiar faces, but a lot of new faces as well. So we're really grateful for your investment in this conversation. So as you may or may not know, Connecting Young Nebraskans holds an every other year summit where we bring young Nebraskans from across the state together. And that's really been part of our calling card since we started 10 years ago. We've had some amazing summits over the years. As you may have seen, we are planning on hosting a summit in the fall, October upcoming here in wonderful Ord, Nebraska. And unfortunately, the in-person summit has been officially postponed, the in-person summit until fall of 2021, with the location still being in wonderful Ord, Nebraska. And we're planning an exciting mini virtual summit in October of 2020. So please stay tuned for more updates. We'll be making an official announcement with more details soon. We really do appreciate everyone's support of Connecting Young Nebraskans and are excited to be offering an important virtual learning and networking event like All Voices at the Table. And so keep your eyes out for future programming through our network. You can keep in touch with us through Facebook, through our email list if you'd like to learn more about how to get involved. Would encourage you to reach out to Rhonda after the event today. So again, thanks for everyone's time. We look forward to interacting throughout today's session. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Jonathan. At this time, I'm going to introduce our facilitator, Carlos, and he does have Charity Adams who will be assisting him. Carlos Garcinas is a speaker, coach, and facilitator with I Choose Purple Consulting, focusing on intercultural leadership development. Carlos has lived in Nebraska since 1994 and has worked with people from all over the world who now call Nebraska home. From assisting immigrant transition into their new home, offering English classes, citizenship classes, leadership development opportunities to assist in finding the resources needed to succeed. So we are very fortunate to have Carlos lead us today, and I'm going to turn it over to him and take it away, Carlos.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I just did a silly thing. I went to move my windows and I kicked myself out of the chat. So kicked myself out of the Zoom. So thank you for being here. So real quick, some of you might have access to the slides. They're going to be in the chat. Charity, if you have any problems, Charity is in the chat, and you can respond or you can add questions. If you need something, you can feel free to go in there. So I'm going to ask you to, on slide 8, there's some helpful guidelines that you're going to be able to know who is in the room in those slides and how they're taking care of themselves. So, but I'm going to ask you for just a moment. Let's take a 30-second moment of silence because taking care of yourself is important. So take a deep breath. When you're ready, take a deep breath. Let's just take a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you. And so as we get started, why are we here? And I know Rhonda shared a little bit. And thank you, Jay and Dr. Grover for being with us. And I know they've been part of multiple conversations, but the catalyst for many of these conversations was the unfortunate death of George Floyd. That was a catalyst for many communities, for many people of color, and many people in more white communities to say, okay, I'm having a hard time processing what's happening. I'm sure all of you are familiar with George Floyd and what has happened. And in the backdrop of COVID, in the backdrop of other people of color that have had an encounter with police brutality. And one thing that it's good to, in our last conversation with Micah Madlock and Dr. Beverly Clark, one of the things that they wanted to verbalize and get out is that we support the police, that we are thankful for what law enforcement is doing, but also how do we create a higher calling of accountability, not only from our law enforcement, but also from our community leaders, from our community partners. How do we create this higher calling of how do we take care of each other? So this is why we're here. CYN said, hey, we met and we wanted to put out a statement. What do we do? How do we react? Since then, which has been a couple months, we didn't just want to create a statement and not do anything about it. So that's how all the voices at the table came about. And what we want to do for Dr. Grover, Jermaine, really is an honest conversation, uncomfortable conversation, a bold conversation where we have many voices at the table and sometimes not sure what to do. So for all of us there on the call, maybe you're here because you're saying, hey, I've heard about this and I'm interested in hearing more. Or maybe you're in the middle saying, hey, I'm somewhat familiar, this comes near home, I really want to do something about it, but I'm not sure what. Or maybe you're on the other side of, I am a social justice warrior and I need everybody to change and jump in right now because we're going to make change. Maybe you're there. What I'm asking you now, on slide 10, you'll see some of the rules of engagement that I've practiced when I enter a room. And what I would like you all today is to pause your judgment as you hear the stories, as you engage in this conversation. It is okay to face your fears. It is okay not to feel okay. Choosing curiosity over judgment. Considering the impact of our words and the intent behind our words and our actions. Leaning into discomfort. Admitting that we're fragile. Forgiving often. Calling people in rather than out. Seeking authenticity and embodying our truths. We're going to talk about lived experiences that we all have. To me, I've been trying to come up with a response to George Floyd since it happened. I have not come up with one, but I've been able to engage in conversations about Black America, a white America, the conversations going on in our social media, the conversations going on in our living rooms with our friends, as we're getting ready some places to work together and come into a room. How do we face and how do we engage these conversations? So I'm going to ask you to, again, take some time to breathe. I'm going to ask you to be vulnerable. I'm going to ask you to just jump in. Charity is going to help us out. On slide 11, here's what we're going to be doing. So get ready for it. You're going to have an opportunity to meet one or two other people, and we're going to do a round robin. Jermaine and Dr. Grover are going to be part of this mix, so don't be authentic, be ready, be comfortable to participate. Round one, you're going to have about a minute and a half. Introduce yourself and answer the question, what makes you feel safe, willing to take risks, or valued in conversations about race? That's number one. We're going to come back into the big group, and then we're going to go again into a second breakout group where you're going to introduce yourself and share what makes you feel unsafe, undervalued, and unwilling to take risks in conversations about race, okay? Then we're going to come back again for a third time, but this third time, you're going to have about 3 or 4 people in your room, and I want you to introduce yourself, but also share what is your commitment for today, and there is a link with some ideas of possible commitment. So give me a thumbs up if you're ready. If there are any questions, no? All right, let me go to my next screen. Cool. So Charity, send us out to our first breakout. Remember, you have about a minute and a half. Introduce yourself and answer that question on slide 11, question 1. Go. Awesome. Thank you. All right. Well, again, on the slide 13, if you want to write in your comments there, you can. Let's get started with this conversation. Dr. Grover is the Grand Island Public Schools superintendent and has been with Grand Island Public Schools for 4 years and has been a great and amazing leader through changes, through growth, through challenging leadership, through really modeling leadership as well, and going through obviously what we're going, all of us, with COVID. And I know right now in her mind is weighing heavy if that we're going back to school or what is happening around education. Jermaine is also, he was in Harvard for a while as an educator. And the way we came up with the panelists is we knew people who had relationship with them and we wanted to hear their story. So on your screen, you have either speaker view or, I'm not sure what the other one is speaker view or gallery view, and you can see everybody. So feel free to enlarge your screen as they share their story. And here's what how we're gonna proceed. I will give Dr. Grover, Jermaine, I'll give you guys a little bit of time to introduce yourselves, share with us what you want to share with us. And then I would like to ask you some questions about, the importance of education. Why are we here after the death of George Floyd? How do we as leaders can interact, not only as people of color, but what suggestions do you have for our white community members? They're saying, how do we engage in this conversation in a way that is authentic, in a way that is intentional? And we know it's going to be uncomfortable, but how do we engage? And also the importance of education. Both of you are in the education field. The importance of our history. So, Dr. Grover, would you like to go first and introduce yourself, share a little bit about you, anything that you want us to know from your lived experience?
Oh, okay. Very good. Thank you all so much for being here. This is my first time to the group, but I can already tell a very powerful group. Some faces I recognize, so that's great. So a combination of connections from across the state, and also I may have a parent or two here on the call, and I think that's exciting for me to see a different intersection of where maybe some of our purpose meet. Considering some of our community members and other leaders across the state. So thank you so much for being here. I do want to just maybe start out with just a little bit of my background, and then Mr. Barson, you can kind of break some of those questions down. I look forward to the conversation. So I was born and raised in Alabama. And if you've heard of Monroe County, and I want to talk about just maybe my background just a little bit, because I think it helps to frame the conversation. And so first of all, I am the oldest of three. And my parents are still together, still in Alabama, and we just come from a very close-knit family. And much about this conversation, I have to admit that I don't think I really understood racism until into my adulthood. So thinking about rural poverty, or just being in a rural area and I think I've come to realize that I believe I was very sheltered and probably many of the things that my parents protected me from. Because if you have ever heard of To Kill a Mockingbird, that is my county seat. So Monroe County, that is where I grew up. And so most recently, if you got a chance to see or the movie Just Mercy, or read the book Just Mercy, and so of course it was the story of Walter McMillian, who went to prison for many years for a crime that he did not commit, and he was framed by the police officers, and so that's the town that I grew up in. So those names, those faces that are on the screen of Sheriff Tate, I remember him in the stories around our dinner table about how to avoid, the cops and so forth. And even the attorney, Tommy Chapman, I remember going into his office, as an older adult working through some education issues. And so when I think about my life now, I went on to be a first-generation college student, and right now, probably sitting with about 4 degrees. I've spent time as a elementary teacher in Alabama. I went on to be a principal at the age of 25. And from Alabama to Texas, I spent 13 years there as an educator, where I earned my doctorate. And now here in Nebraska, and I became the first Black superintendent ever hired in 2016 in the state of Nebraska. And so I often, I'm so weighted about how my life turned out differently than so many other people that I was surrounded with. And so I'm excited about having this conversation. And as times have progressed in these most recent, incidents, I think that I'm coming into knowing myself more. Definitely, education is what I'm passionate about. And because I was one of those students who was told that I wasn't college material, and my last name dictated what they thought my future should be like. And so it's been my lifelong effort to ensure that every student understands their choices beyond, high school. And so now it just seems like I'm more convicted about my position of power and how I move the conversation forward. And so thank you for having me today, and I look forward to answering some of those questions, Mr. Barsanis.
Thank you. And again, just such a powerful conversation that we've been able to have. And it's always I'm always learning. And Dr. Grover and I, she introduced me to actually the CUBE, the Council of Urban School Boards. I'm part of the school board in Grand Island, and being able to be part of the conversations around Black history and our students of color. And there's just something different about it. There's just some, I've gotten to learn about more of the culture and more of the history. And I know Dr. Clark is on the call too, and he's been able to challenge me a couple of times and say, hey, this is how this relates to me. Because I am an immigrant to the United States. So I know my story is very different. And that's when we started this conversation, that's something that I had to make clear to myself. While I can sympathize and empathize with some things and relate, I needed to focus on Black America, not on my immigrant story, but on Black America and how do I learn more. So thank you for your leadership, Dr. Grover. Jermaine, I know you had quite a bit of media and quite a bit of community coming around to support your cause, and you're standing alone in Harvard in a way, but actually not so much alone, because people, you were able to bridge a conversation of, we want to create better towns in rural America and rural Nebraska. So Jermaine, you want to take time to introduce yourself, share with us a little bit about you.
Oh man, Carlos, thank you very much. Man, Dr. Grover, I love to hear when, Black families, stay tight knit like that and really come from that place. Cause I think sometimes America tends to think that, oh man, we just a bunch of savages at times, and we can't have that family unit, and I really strive for that. That's what I really push for. With that being said, I came from one of the things that led me to do that, George Floyd and standing up, was a lot of the things that were going on in my town. But even before then, we got to understand who Jermaine Guignard really is and where he really comes from. I come from San Diego, California, in which prostitution, gang members, that lifestyle was, I thought was really normal. I honestly thought a police car and ambulances and that whole lifestyle of being a thug and a gang member and on that and understanding that, that's what I thought my life was. I thought that's what being a Black male was all about, coming from that world. I came from a single mom who was on crack. My father was, that song Papa Was a Rolling Stone. That was my father. Had 11 kids with, I think, 7 different women. So you guys have to understand the depths of where I started off and where I came from, and what saved me in my psychiatry, which was a great situation, but a bad, I call it fortunate, but unfortunate. Now that I look back, was football, was sports. Because although it was a football enabled me to get out of hell, you guys. It enabled me to get around the world and see things that I wasn't ever going to be able to see if it wasn't for football. But with that being said, I didn't realize playing football and being able to get out, I was still being used. I was still a commodity. I still wasn't being of value, if that makes sense. Because in the football world and that NCAA, it's all about generating that money and getting that dollar. And so that was my world until I came to Hastings, Nebraska. And for the first time, as Dr. Grover said, In San Diego, California, things are moving so fast that you're not able to really see race. So in one aspect, although I was being used, and although I may have didn't see the traps like I needed to see, sports kind of sheltered me from seeing racism and prejudices like I needed to really see up until I came to Nebraska, because everything is a lot slower and then things are so much more white, black, and Mexican to an extent, what I'm saying. You have no choice but to almost deal with one another. And I won't say deal with one another more than I should say live amongst each other. And you just have to learn to coexist to an extent, unlike San Diego, where things, like I said, are moving so fast and you have so many different races and cultures that out here, it is what it is. And so I never really understood racism and prejudices until I really came to Nebraska. And I had to deal with being called nigger for the first time, in which it was sincere. And so I'm coming from a little bit different background, in which I got into coaching, into education. Really, for me, it was to, and still is to this day, to educate the young man of color, be it Mexican, Black, Native, and to get him to understand and see that through education, you can save yourself and get to somewhere in your world in which you can take care of your family, create a legacy. And so that's really what my background is more about, being a Black man in education and just getting white males in particular in positions of power to see us more as a value. But until we can be seen as value, we must value ourselves. And so that's really what my angle and my background is. I'm sorry to get a little scattered, but that's kind of where I'm coming from with this angle. And hopefully we can learn from me and kind of bridge that gap. I can't speak for all Black men, but hopefully I can give you guys a taste of what it is we're dealing with, and being a Black male in education.
Jermaine, thank you. Dr. Grover, thank you. So let me just jump into the education piece and working with students. And I had the opportunity to work with minority. We were kind of laughed at this, but never really realized it until one of my friends said it. My title was Minority at Risk Coordinator. So I got to work with the troublemakers, right? I got to work with the kids that were minorities and also were troublemakers, and there's this title to it. How do we engage in conversation in history when people of color, Black American history, has been told from one side? So I'll give you an example of how I see it, and then just tell me what you think, what your perspective is. So many times I would see my students who were polarized by what their community saw in the media. Without parents, maybe much like your story, Jermaine, of how do we break this stereotype? Then I found myself saying, well, but I'm also here in this country, going through the same things. I'm the living stereotype of what people hear and see. But how do we give people a true shot to say, pause your judgment on what you've heard and see, my color does not determine my potential in education, in their communities. So I want to put this thought there and tell me, whoever wants to go for Dr. Grover, Jermaine, what comes to mind?
Jermaine, you're probably going to have to help here. That's a deep question. I mean, it's a complicated question. And so I've really tried to process what you were saying. I think one of the things that, this is just going to be from a personal standpoint, and it's a little bit different of how I've worked with students when I worked in a more diverse setting, when I've had more African American students, Black students, then now I kind of shifted where I have more Latinx students. And so it's been a difference between how some of that works and plays out in supporting the students through that process. But my family values, right? So I think when you're part of what people, is kind of back to what we were talking about earlier, when people think that we don't rally around our kids, right? Like, so there's such a perception that folks of color just don't care about their kids' education, they're not involved, but that is so wrong, right? That is just not the case. And so while my parents were both high school graduates, and they both come with their unique stories, they've always instilled in me that I could be whatever I wanted to be, right? They've always instilled in me a sense of community, and pretty much expected for me. They didn't ever say you have to go to college or whatever, but basically they said you can do whatever you want to do, right? So there's a level of foundation that's already built in me, and hopefully and also I think that's why that conversation about having teachers that look like their students to some degree, right? Doesn't mean all of them have to be, because I would have to say there's many white folks that have been levers for me too, right? They have been my supporters. And so I want to make sure I call out that part too. But there's just some things about when somebody looks like you, and especially when they've made it, right? That they're going to have a different level of expectation, and they're going to tell you the truth about what folks that don't look like you think about you, right? And when you are faced with that type of truth, I think it provokes you to want to be able to be seen in a different type of way. I think about, and so by me having teachers of color, and I could call their names right now, those pivotal points when they wouldn't tolerate us doing anything that did not elevate our education and things like that. So now when I think about, I have some of my Black students, if they have an issue, they might email me, right? And I'm oftentimes thinking about, because I am only one of 2 Black educators in this school district. There's only one other Black teacher, and our Hispanic population, we have a few more, and it's increased. Let me say, I think I've increased it by a large percentage in the last 4 years, but it is still probably a single digit, percentage, right? And so I'm oftentimes thinking about, if I wasn't here, who would they be calling? Who would they be emailing? So when we talk about, so I guess that's just one point I can make around it, is the value of having folks that look like the student body in front of them to help overcome. And also, I think they become a peer to their other colleagues to really help us to be able to see our students in a different light, and to start to break down some of the stigma and the biases that are associated with color.
Dr. Grover, powerful. I see some shapes shaking. Jermaine, what would you like to add?
Carlos, can you ask that question one more time, just so I can wrap myself around that a little bit more?
Well, and I'm actually gonna kind of take it a little bit deeper, if you allow me, in the sense of,
Yes, sir.
let's talk in education in our communities. And I was asked this question by in working in my community. I had kids that I used to work with them, and people would be like, well, you're getting me in trouble. And they would pull what we call the race card. Is it because I'm brown? Is it because I'm Black? And I think there's 2 powerful things in there. When a kid is frustrated, doesn't have anybody that looks like them, and comes from maybe not having a support system. I knew my role as somebody of color, to your point, Dr. Grover. I wanted to become the mentor that they never had, the parent that was absent, the support system that they didn't have. So I wanted to become that. But then I'm also fighting the systemic issues of perception, prejudice. How do we engage in a society that tells us about white and black, and say, well, yeah, I see you because of your race, but that doesn't determine who you are. How do we leverage the conversation between black and white communities and put it on the table to say, it's not because I'm black. There's more, my color doesn't determine that, but I want you to see my color. Working with, being in Harvard, for example, when you were there, obviously we stand out, right? I wake up like that every morning. So I had an incident last night here in Grand Island that I was so frustrated, but I hesitated to call the police because I just hesitated. I had that in me that said, you have the losing end no matter what. So how do we empower communities to acknowledge, if you're calling, I'm going to take the school example. If you're calling a kid and he's saying, hey, you're picking on me because I'm black or I'm brown. Well, are you picking on him because he's black or brown? And on the other side, how do we empower our kids of color to say, you have to continue to work hard because people are going to see you. And there's times that you're going to have to work twice as hard.
For me, Carlos, it was kind of, let me say this first and foremost. If I would have made it ever about race and me being black, I would have never been teaching at Harvard, Nebraska right now, because it's almost like apple pie, blueberry, leave it to beaver, American. Let me say it that way. And so I was able to cross some barriers as far as, one, coming from a very poor poverty. Football, sports was able to help me out. So I was able to talk, and being, I guess, diverse. Sometimes people use that word. But sometimes when you look at me, you can't really say, you can't use that diverse excuse, I guess, because I'm just Mr. Diverse, I guess, right? And so I was able to cross a bunch of different barriers and speak a lot of languages in which people became very comfortable with at Harvard. So ironically, as much as it was very apple pie American, a lot of people were able to gather around me. I was able to get in people's world and allow them to drop barriers. At the same time, I had to drop barriers as well. With my growth and maturity with that, now I have to speak that in answer that two different ways. And my maturity with that, some of the circumstances that happened with me within the school system because of my color made me see how much not only was black or men of color important in education, but the lack, therefore, of leadership that we had in education and how we were actually approaching that. I question a lot of times, oh man, Carlos and group, I question a lot of times as far as do we get as young as boys of color? And these are the things that I kind of didn't want to. I guess what I'm saying is I tried to, because I was answering so many different questions. I'm breaking down so many different barriers, being a black male from San Diego, being able to talk from a sports background. I try not to see that the young people of color are being it's just not the same. Education is just not the same for them. And so once I seen George Floyd, and there was a lot of things that went on with that, I had to step up and begin to answer a lot of questions within myself. And those questions I began to mature and answer and see a lot of things in education that I needed to stand up for a lot more for. And the answer is, group, and the reality of it is that it's just we're not getting the same treatment, and it's just not the same. And I needed to be in education to be able to speak and answer and have a voice for those that really can't. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to, how can I put this, group? Unfortunately, I just wasn't able to get around my people of color. I've been around a lot of the Latino group. I've been around a lot of the Native group. but I see there's a huge discrepancy in education when it comes to just people of color overall. But when it comes to our young Black boys and our young, just to me, I just feel like, I don't know what it is, but we are just not getting taught and educated the same way. And for whatever reason.
You know, and this gets to the talks of the hardships of how do we have these conversations. And for all of you that are here with us, you know, this is not a feel sorry for the Black community or give it, you know, because we could bring the whole concept of white privilege and what does that mean? And then our guts kind of get a reaction, and it's such a complex thing to understand. And there is a different treatment. And that's where I can relate on some things because I wake up with this skin color, and I've been part of those conversations of, you're never going to make it. Yeah. You're not good enough. But then how do we empower those conversations? For our audience that is here, for a team, for a group that is here today, how do we talk about the systemic? How do we talk about the systems that we've played in place? Because often when I talk to my educators or leaders of color in different scenarios where there is a wide majority, there is this feeling of, I have to show up sharper. I can't really show up as myself many times because I have to do the whole culture switch and code switch, and I have to fit in, right? But when they're telling me, show up like yourself, it's like, well, but when I show up as myself, you don't give me the same treatment. So there is that reality. For all of us that are leaning in saying, okay, how do we talk about that, those systemic systems issues raised, that there is a difference? How do we start putting those things at the table to have an honest conversation and say, yeah, I noticed that we have to make a change in our policies or in whatever it is. How do we put that difference conversation at the table and not be seen as the angry Black man, the angry Black woman, or, oh, there he goes, now we're going to complain, now it's going to be, how do we say, hey, this is not right? George Floyd, I have not seen the video, but I have to teach my daughter who has seen it. I got to say, hey, this happened. And it's so hard to call on your coworkers and say, hey, that's wrong. You know, the officers that were there, why didn't they step in? And I kind of relate it to our coworkers, the people that we live in. How do we call in our coworkers and say, hey, we're stepping on the necks of community members. We need to stop.
You know, Carlos, I will speak up and say this. On one hand, and I have to be very honest with you guys, group, a lot of the power that within education is coming from a white male perspective, and they're not allowing a lot of, I was told one time in Harvard that Jermaine, let me put it out there. My daughter was called a nigger in the bathroom wall. She was called a nigger, and I was working at the school as a teacher. It was wrote, Mari's a nigger bitch on the bathroom wall. And I went to my administrator as a teacher because I felt, my wife told me at the time, if you don't handle this, I'm going up there to handle it. So I felt like my job was in a situation where I needed to handle this as a teacher. I went up there and handled that as a teacher. Nothing got done for 2 weeks. The next week that went by, I went up there as a father. And because of that, I was bombarded at the school. Now, what I'm trying to get at is this. As a Black male in education, it is a totally different, as somebody told me, 2 things I got out of this. One, Jermaine, we want to help you, but we can't say anything because if we do, we're going to be in the same situation as you. And 2, as a Black male in education, somebody said, Jermaine, they wanted you to be they wanted you to act. Initially, when it was all said and done, they tried to change you into a white male. And so I think you guys have to understand, as a Black teacher, as a teacher of color, there is a different stress, there is a different stereotype, there is a different understanding of what you guys perceive us and what you want us to be, and what you're expecting us to be as teachers. And sometimes in order for me to be beautiful, and I continually say this, you have to be yourself. You have to understand what professionalism is, and I get that, and I understand that. But a lot of our beauty and a lot of who we have to be has to come out of the mindset of what a white male perceives us and wants us to become. So that's just an example what I had, a circumstance that I had to go through, and the situation how I had to go through it, and how I had to maneuver through it. Um, um, and at times it's very difficult, but we need those teachers and those teachers of color in there, almost like a for protection. Sometimes it's not even about teaching, more than it becomes more about a protection and a secure, and just knowing that we're in those halls with those other students, to know that a Mr. G is in that building, changes your whole emotional soul when you're in that building. So I just wanted to get that across.
Thank you. And Dr. Grover, I'll hand it to you. And one of the things I just want to mention is, these conversations are often I have to address the area of, it is from a white male perspective. For all the white males in the room, please just pause and process this not as a personal attack on your identity, or we're just talking about, let's put it on the table. So leaning into either shared understanding or deeper understanding of how this is coming about. Dr. Grover.
My mind was going back to, I don't know, just maybe short glimpses of like civil rights movements and different things like that. And so I think one of the things, be it right or wrong, which is mostly wrong, but it's reality, is that I do believe that we have to understand how to navigate the present systems in order to create new systems. And I say that because you have to be able to be at the table, right? To be able to be part of the decisions that are happening, right? So we got to get to the table. And this is just my own personal perspective on that. And I do believe that as I think about myself personally, and long before coming, to Nebraska, and I can look at even the progress that we've made here in our school district, and that's the way we change some of these systems. So I think it's more than just about the conversation and our beauty. And you're right, we have to. I feel like I have to work 10 times as hard. Thank God that God built me an engine, right? That I thrive on that, and I think that's living life on purpose. Because I think the way to beat the system is through excellence. And I think by striving for excellence, that is what we should be instilling within our students to be able to reach that level. And so this whole code switching idea, I have 2 sons of my own, and trust me, this is a daily conversation, Jermaine. One just turned 21 this week. And so, how do you want to be seen, respected, and I don't think there's anything wrong with bringing your culture into the room. I think that's appropriate, but at the end of the day, that protection, that elevation for our students, we have to be a part of it in order to. So when I think about even right now, my kids having college opportunities, and knowing that I'm tracking data on each and every one of my kids, down to their color, down to their family backgrounds. And when we bring programs that allows me now to work side by side with their parents to be able to change those dynamics, I feel like that's the way that we begin to break the cycle. So as many more Jermaines that I can put out into the community, as many more Tawanas that I can put out into the community, I think we can begin to change the narratives beyond a conversation. And I think we're going to continue to have those kitchen table conversations to help our kids know about their identities and how to use their identities. I was working, I'll never forget this story here. I have a student leadership council, and I had a Hispanic male, and he kind of ran into the meeting late one day. He was very frustrated. He kind of blew his top, and he had went to visit with the counseling. When we have wonderful educators here in Grand Island Public Schools, but he was going to be a first generation college student. And he was so mad, and he was like, I hate Miss so-and-so. I'm so ticked off, pissed off, whatever language he used with Miss so-and-so. She know I need to get my application in, and she's just not listening, whatever. So I could tell that he had just kind of got into a confrontation with a counselor. So immediately right then it told me that I needed to support my students in knowing how to articulate their needs in a way that they can be heard, right? And I began to work with them through some different trainings on knowing how to navigate, knowing how to negotiate, knowing how to state your position, knowing what your position, what your rights are and your steps, and knowing what are your next steps. And of course, we were able to get him the support, but immediately when we're put into those positions where we can't be heard, the door is now shut on us in a different type of way.
Yeah. Thank you. You know, and again, as you can see, these are not easy conversations. There's just a lot to process. And what I want to do next, obviously, there's never enough time. So one thing that I want you to keep in mind is this is a non-closure approach. There is non-closure to conversations like this. The goal is not to come up with the ideal solution and everything is fixed. No, this is something that we continue to work at, that we continue to move forward, that we continue to grow. There are 3 questions that have been submitted, and I want to ask those of both of our guests and give you an opportunity to share your answer. And then I will open it up for any other questions that might be available, and then we'll go into a closing activity. But you know, it really, to both of the your conversations and the point about getting more people in, more leaders in, sometimes people, what I hear is, well, you just want to put random people in and not giving them a chance, or not competent people. No, we're saying we have a lot of competent people in our communities of color, Black professionals, but we many times have not jumped into realizing that we've had a system that has not given an opportunity for footing. And an example, Dr. Grover, as I've shared this before, but as we did a search for a new superintendent in Granada Public Schools, this time was the first time that we opened it up in a search in a organization that had Black professional superintendent candidates. So we had to realize if it's there, why are we not using that resource? So being aware that, are we really trying? Are we really opening? Are we really saying, you know, I've been in the same thing. Hey, you're invited, but am I included? I was invited to many things, and for 20 years I would show up and the door was closed, right? But then finally the door opened. Now I have to look for my seat at the table. So we continue to grow and have those conversations. So I will read the first question, and if there's anything that you both want to share, there's 3 questions, and then from there we'll move on to any closing thoughts. So the first question is, there are government programs that have systematically worked against education of people of color. For example, redlining. My question is, how has systemic racism through programming influenced education for people of color? And either one can take it.
Wow.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. You're good. Okay. Whenever we have a conversation like this, I'm kind of reminded. Do all of us kind of remember like the story of Paul on the ship in the Bible? For those of us that may look at that, and you know, there's a part of them that talks about how they made it to land on broken pieces, right? And so I'm always reminded that we have to grab our little piece of this ship and try to hold on to it to try to make it to land, because there is so much that is just wrong with our system. So I'm just going to try to grab hold to my little piece, which is around education, to try to get us to some safe lands, because many of our kids, their lives are at stake. And so even when I think about, this is going to sound so simple, because I try to get to action in the efforts that I lead. And if I think of something like early childhood education, right? So if you think about a system, so even from the way that when we are in the wombs of our parents, as folks of color or living in poverty, our experiences are already different, right? Whether or not and so when we are reading to our children and doing all the things that make a difference at such an early age, and so when you talk about the systems of education, many of our kids, like right now, many of our kids, they're on waiting lists to even get into early childhood education. If their parents can't afford it, for them to have just even starting out. In the redlining conversation, we are still crippled, right, by what the impacts of redlining. And so the key levers for me is definitely trying to get my kids to early childhood education and the role of literacy. Well, if we go to the statistics of how literacy is coupled with the prison, with the incarceration rates, literacy to what type of home mortgage that you're going to, the rates that you're going to have. When we think about literacy and healthcare, all of that. So just that primary, when we're saying, you know, a free and appropriate public education, we're saying that it's available to all of our kids, but it starts so much earlier. And so the systems of education, I think we have to know the alignment between how we start out and what that life trajectory is going to be for a student that pays off for them, and trying to connect the dots.
Perfect. Thank you. And here, I know there's always, we need more time. The questions are on slide 12. But as we have some community leaders and community members, in one of the questions, you know, how do we address in our communities where representation and leadership is low or non-existent? So could you speak in a bold, intentional, just your heart out, for all of you that are from rural Nebraska or communities that you're saying, hey, how do we have this conversation? Because we have no Black Americans in our community. But we want to attract young families like Carrie and her husband and her family who are a mixed marriage, or Carlos and Angela who are mixed, and we want to have those in our communities. Can you give, what can they do as leaders and community members to create this space for where people that look like you and me would want to move to those communities? Jermaine, you have some of that experience as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I thought this was, honestly, it's just about being honest and real. I have a Mexican American wife, and just coming to Harvard and her being from here, man, and her family was just, you know, things was a little shaky at first, and things was a little shaky in the community at first, you know. But you just have to be willing to be honest and real and open and communicate, you know, and sometimes it's not going to be easy. It's not going to be easy at all. But you have to, like I said, you just have to be willing to, you know, be accountable, man. And that's really what it comes down to. And come from a place of love. Sometimes if you're misinformed or don't know some things, you can come off as being ignorant, but sometimes it's just a lack therefore of, and not knowing some things. And so just willing to inform yourself and educate yourself, and you know, sometimes negativity can produce some great positivity and some beautiful things if you're just willing to sacrifice. And so if you know, humiliation, sacrifice, and some love, and you'll be willing to get there. But it takes work, and it's really a process. And you know, once you understand that, and you're willing to, and you want, that's the most important thing, and you want it, things in lightweight work itself out. But stand from a place of love and respect, and things that tend to work itself out.
Thank you. Dr. Grover?
Can I say something really
yes,
quick?
Jonah.
So our family just relocated back here from the East Coast about 18 months ago. And then looking at, and I will say that my kids, I have mixed kids, mixed marriage, and my kids were surprised at the lack of conversation that takes place at school and community about race issues. We were in, I think, Western Nebraska, and going to see some stuff because we just haven't been here in a while. And we were talking about this, and somebody told my kids, well, that doesn't happen here. That's an Omaha problem. And I was shocked and taken aback by that. And also too, they're very they're very strong in calling out things that don't feel right. And so that's been a bit of a challenge for them too. But on the flip side, and going to the Black community, they get made fun of all the time because they don't sound like Nebraskans, they don't act like Nebraskans, they don't talk like Nebraskans. So it's been a little bit of a challenge, but we're happy about being here. The school system probably hates my guts because I think I'm in there all the time. Sorry, Dr. Grover, but and then they're like, stop coddling them, make them do more. And so again, this has been a really strange and interesting time. But again, I'd rather be facing these issues here than having to try to do this with a kid on the East or West Coast.
Thank you. No, and it sounds like, again, community leadership. Dr. Grover, how can white community leaders, what would be your recommendation of how do we engage with everything that is happening? From there, we're going to go to a small groups for a closing activity, and then my dear friend Carrie will close us out. But Dr. Grover, what can white community leaders do to engage in this conversation?
I think this is one of the things that has come out from the George Floyd and all the most recent. I've never had, first of all, it was hurtful to even know, but I've never had so many parents of color to reach out to me, or whether they're parenting students of color the way that they have in the last couple of months. And I was shocked that of probably what they've been holding inside that they had not shared, that I wasn't even aware of until now. And so as you witnessed yesterday, Mr. Barson, is being part of our leadership training, I would have to say that this was probably the first time ever that we've had the type of conversation about race and the training, right? And right now we're doing the How to Be an Anti-Racist book. And at first I thought that was a little strong, to start with. But I received a lot of great feedback. People are grateful for the opportunity. And so I think, as I stated before, when we're able to open up conversations and we can tell the good and the bad. So for every person that stands up and tell their story, their experience, I believe that there is going to be one more person that can do that. And now what we're seeing in this movement, I want to encourage all of our non-folks of color on the call today when we talk about being allies. And I feel very fortunate in Grand Island. I feel like I have the support of my community. I have people that have emailed me to say, if you are experiencing something, we want to know about it so that we can get behind you. We don't want anybody threatening you, as you're having to make some tough decisions. And that gives me a great deal, of confidence, because I have to think about when I'm not on screen as Dr. Grover and I'm just driving down the street and they just see a Black woman, what I'm going to be subject to. So knowing that my community, when they can step out and they can say that, it gives me a great deal of cover and courage. And so I guess I can encourage you to try to be that person that is going to be brave enough to step up so that we can have the conversations, one table at a time.
Thank you so much. This is so good. And there's so much into it. And I'm going to ask you, I know we're hitting our time here. We have 1 minute left, but I'm going to ask you if you can bear with us for about 3 more minutes. We're going to go into a room. What I'm going to ask you to do is when we're sent into rooms, you'll see a room number that you're in. And in the slide deck, there is starting on slide 16, you will see there's room numbers for each slide. Go to the room number and the slide number that is for your group. And in it, you have 2 or 3 minutes. Answer the question, what do you need from yourself to engage in this conversation? And there's also another column that says, what do I need from others to engage in this conversation? So we're going to go out for those breakout rooms for the next 2 minutes. If somebody could scribe, we'll come back and we'll close. Charity, send us to our room. Thank you so much. I know there is never enough time. I'm going to leave that Google Slide doc open so that you can continue to put those lists throughout the day, so feel free to visit. I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself and just give a round of applause and thank you to our amazing guest today, Jermaine. Dr. Grover, thank you so much for what you've brought into this conversation. And with that, Carrie, if you would like to close us out, and just again, an honor and privilege to be part of these conversations with an amazing group of people. So, yeah, I'm looking for Carrie. Are you?
Hey, I'm right here. I'm Carrie. Hi, I'm Carrie Malik Madani. I work for Nebraska Community Foundation. I also serve on the Fund Advisory Committee for Connecting Young Nebraskans. I echo so much gratitude to Jermaine and Dr. Grover. You were both just incredible. Thank you for lending your voices to the All Voices at the Table series. That said, we are continuing to have these conversations. It's not two and done. So approximately every 3 weeks, we'll continue to hold these virtual discussions. We invite everyone to join us for these. You do not need to be young. You do not need to be a Nebraskan. All are welcome to attend these conversations. So we hope that you will feel free to share them with others. Like we said, all voices at the table. So all are welcome. And we hope that you'll share it with others, invite others to join that you think would benefit from this. To do that, you can follow us on Facebook. You can get on our email list. Those are 2 ways that you can learn more about upcoming conversations and the voices that will be featured in those. I'm going to leave you all with a quote. Thanks for sticking with us till the end. That quote is from Maya Angelou: "Nothing will work unless you do." So thank you for being here today. Thank you for putting in the work, and we hope to see you next time.
Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.